enlightening. It's really interesting to see how things have become easier. I remember when I was doing surgical residency, how difficult it was to do a colonoscopy and how easier it has become now, and how well you can see. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Sten Ekberg. He's a chiropractic physician and also fellowship-trained neurologist, and he also does kinesiology and body restoration techniques, and he's certified in them. I know you all have, and we all have a short attention span, but I think he's going to keep us spellbound. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much, and appreciate all of you staying. We're going to try to keep this very interesting. For the most part, I will talk about things you have never heard about. We're going to open up a completely new paradigm, and even though we'll approach things differently, I'm not contradicting anything that anyone has said. We're just looking at things from slightly different perspectives, and everything that they're talking about is valid and appropriate. But what is health? We've talked about diseases and cancer and things that go wrong, but health is basically the thing that keeps it from going wrong. Health is when everything works the way it's supposed to work. And that's what we're going to talk about. What is that thing that works, and how do you keep it working? So in this country, and the Indian population are certainly well above average in health, but as a nation, we have no idea what health is. We spend $2 trillion a year in so-called health care, but most of it is actually sick care. And even though we spend the most money of any country in the world, we rank close to the bottom of industrialized nations. So the dollars that we spend for so-called health isn't really getting us health. It's not really raising that function much. So then they tell us the general idea, and I'm glad to hear that Indians don't like to take drugs. We should keep that to a minimum. There's a time when they're appropriate. But if drugs really cured something, then you could take a drug and it would fix the problem and you could stop taking it. But that's not what happens. So for the most part, the drugs that we take for lifestyle and functional problems, we have to keep taking them for the rest of our lives. We have 5% of the world's population, we take 55% of the drugs. And that's not a sign of how healthy we are, that's a sign of how sick we are. And if you look through the literature, and this is not my work, this has been done, it's research from the New England Journal of Medicine, Lancet, and so forth. There is about 1 million deaths a year due to healthcare, with inappropriate procedures, drug interactions, side effects, hospitalization, infections, all those things. So what they're talking about is prevention, and that's the way to stay out of the hospital altogether. And you want to have as little to do with it as possible. So what we really want to talk about is the true prevention is to make things not happen in the first place. Early detection is great, but by the time we detect it, it's already happened. And wouldn't it be even better if we can make something work that's supposed to work so it doesn't happen? It doesn't mean we don't get the screenings, it just means we stay so healthy, all the screenings come up negative. And healthcare reform isn't really questioning whether the system is working, it's just trying to get more people into the system. So it's really a different issue than we're talking about. And why is it like this? Well, I think it's because we have the wrong model. We don't understand the body, we don't understand what health is. Symptoms are not causes. When we have pain, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, arthritis, all of those things are not really the problem. They are indicators of something that isn't working. If that something was working, we wouldn't have them in the first place. So when something isn't working, the drug is not ever going to make it work again. It will only cover up the symptom, which again could be appropriate in an emergency, but we really want to figure out what the thing is that's not working. So taking a drug in those situations is sort of like using earplugs when the fire alarm goes off. So you can't hear that pesky little annoying noise, but the building is still coming down. So we still have a problem. Go ahead. So drugs can be lifesavers for emergencies, acute pain. They make no sense for chronic conditions because we have to look at what is the source of the problem. We have to start addressing the source and reversing that source. So what is it that's supposed to work? There are 3 levels of function in the body. When we talk about the stuff that's supposed to work, the first level of function in the body is passive tissue. The passive tissue are things like bones and joints, cartilage, connective tissue, blood cells, fluid, fat cells. They're important. They give your body structure, they give your body shape, but they don't take any action. They're not participating in this function that we're talking about. So the next level up is called active tissue, and that's muscles. But muscles are not just the things that move you around. It's not just the voluntary movement. It's not even just the postural passive movements, but it's your heart and your digestive tract and your focusing of your eye and even in your blood vessels, there are little muscles. You have millions and millions and millions of tiny little muscles, and the only way to make something happen in your body is to have a muscle contract. That is how all action is performed, but muscles don't make any decisions. So when we're talking about the function in the body, muscles are still not where it is. The top level where all function takes place is at the level of regulation. That's your nervous system, your brain and nervous system. Go ahead. Next. So, in terms of function, the regulatory system is the primary, that's the cause. The active system, the muscles, that's a secondary, that's an effect. And the passive system is another, it's a tertiary effect. So if we really want to start addressing things, we have to ask, well, what's causing that? Well, what's causing that? Well, what's causing that? And eventually we get back to the nervous system, and then we get to the lifestyle factors that affect your nervous system. So if we truly understand this, then we have really 2 problems. We either have trauma or a functional problem. And a trauma is if you get shot or stabbed or you fall down the stairs, that's a trauma. Everything else is a functional problem. Everything else. Okay? So let's do a quick little demonstration of function in your body. Can we have a volunteer? A young, strong, healthy person. Go ahead.
I don't know if I'm strong, but I'll come.
You'll win.
Young म्हटलं त्यांनी.
So we will just demonstrate the passive, active, and regulating function in the body, and we'll show you how the nervous system operates on input. So if you face me here, and you hold your left arm out, and I'm going to push down, and you will resist as strong as you can. Hold nice and strong. Very nice. So I'm not looking at if he can resist with 5 pounds or 50 pounds. I'm looking at the integrity of the response. So I'm pushing on bone, which is held up by a muscle, which is controlled by a signal from the brain. And in order for that muscle to test strong, to have that integrity, all 3 portions have to work. Now let's do that again, only move your left leg forward like you're taking a big step. Okay? Hold really nice and strong. And he's not so strong anymore. So what happened? So this shows us several things. First, it shows us that we're testing all three portions, and the bone hasn't changed. The muscle hasn't changed. It's the brain signal that changed. So the muscle test, when performed like this, is a snapshot of brain function. It's telling us the integrity of that signal at that moment with that imposed challenge or situation. It also shows us that this body part provides some sort of input, some sort of signal, information for the brain that apparently is different from here to here. So different that it changes the function of this body part. So that means that your whole body works as an ecosystem. It works as a whole. That's what holism means. And we have to address the whole body. And your body is chemical, it's structural, and it's emotional. And if you bypass any of those, you cannot have optimal health and optimal function. So, why is that happening? Well, it's very, very simple, because usually, and I bet this is true for all of you, you don't walk like this. You walk like that. Alright? It's called a cross-crawl reflex pattern. Ever since you started crawling, you taught your nervous system, whenever this limb moves forward, this arm moves back. So let's check the other arm. I actually checked the same arm, but with the other leg. Okay? And now hold that nice and strong. And it's rock solid, because it's supposed to be. Alright? So, thank you very much. So, the insurance companies don't understand this. So if you come in with a shoulder problem, I'm only allowed to treat your shoulder. But what if it's the hip that's sending the wrong signal to the brain that is causing the shoulder to shut down? So you could actually get hit on the hip and get a shoulder problem from it. Or any other part of your body, because tell me one body part that the brain does not control or regulate. Okay? So it holds true for every cell of your body. Next. So, you've all heard of something called stress. And if you look up conditions, you look up on Google, you look at conditions related to stress, you know what you'll find? Everything. Every single condition that they talked about today, blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, intestinal problems, they're all associated with stress. So what is it that, go ahead. Yeah, so just go ahead. Cancer, hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, allergies, arthritis, pneumonia, headaches, back pain, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, ulcers, irritable bowel, chronic infections. What is the connection? How can something invisible, intangible like stress create all those physical problems in your body? All right, next. So we're going to spend a little time here. That's fine. How does your body really work? And what does stress really do? So we're going to talk, this is the two half moons, that's your cortex. That's a left and a right cortex. That's the most recent development in human evolution. It's a couple of 100,000 years old. Below that, go ahead, is the brainstem. And we're just showing you very simplistically the upper and the lower portion of the brainstem. They're hundreds of millions of years old. They're the same complexity and design in a mouse or an elephant or a human. There's very, very little difference. The cortex is where the differences are. And the cortex is where we have our humanism, our creativity, our planning abilities, and so forth. But when we have stress, go ahead, and that stress can be chemical, structural, or emotional, then that stress causes a shift in how your body processes information. Next. So that stress sends a signal, and the first place that signal is picked up is in your upper brainstem. And we're going to introduce two words. They sound complicated, but they're worth it. Sympathetic and parasympathetic. Your sympathetic nervous system you know as your fight-flight system. That's your stress response. The parasympathetic is your feed-breathe, or rest and digest. These are really two opposites on a seesaw. And what the sympathetic does, it handles the stress response. And what is that? Well, let's imagine that you're sitting at a picnic like this, and you're having a good time, you've had some fun, you've eaten some good food, and your sympathetic and your parasympathetic are in balance. And now a grizzly bear shows up at your picnic. Okay, is everybody going to stay nice and relaxed? Don't think so. What are the physiological changes that will happen? First, your heart rate goes up. Second, your muscle tension goes up. What's the first muscle tension that changes? What does a wrestler look like? Muscle tension increases on muscles on the front of your body above the waist and on the back of your body below the waist. That causes most of the shoulder problems and the sciatica and hip problems that we see. Next, your blood pressure goes up. Why? Because that's an intelligent thing to do in that situation. Your blood pressure goes up so it can speed up the delivery of the blood to the muscles. The vessels constrict and your heart increases contractility so you can get that blood out as fast as possible to the muscles where it can do work and fight that bear or get out of the way. It's a survival instinct. Next, your blood sugar goes up. Your insulin resistance increases because your body wants a lot of that blood sugar available to do the work. Next, your blood thickeners go up. We heard earlier that there's a lot of people on blood thinners. How come? Because when you're stressed, your body is planning to bleed. It thinks if there's a bear out there, there's a chance I might get hurt, and just in case, I'm going to stop the bleeding before it happens. So you increase blood clotting factors. If you're chronically stressed, you get chronically thick blood. Next, cholesterol, specifically LDL cholesterol. When you start bleeding, your body wants to stop the bleeding. And you need blood clotting factors, and part of that cascade of blood clotting is cholesterol. And one of the most important components to heal the wound is cholesterol. And LDL cholesterol is the delivery system. Your liver makes cholesterol to deliver it to the system when you have stress. Okay? What can that stress be? It can be emotional, structural, and chemical. Next. So now here's a really interesting thing that happens. The sympathetic will inhibit the parasympathetic. What that means is there's only so many resources in your body. So if we're going to send a bunch of resources over to fight the bear, we have to borrow from somewhere. We can't send more everywhere. It's like you're in a car. You can't speed up and slow down at the same time. You have to pick one. If you have a seesaw, one end is going up, the other is going down. This is how that system works. So anytime that you send more resources over to the stress response, you will have less resources for your internal stuff. And that's all the stuff that takes care of the healing of your internal organs. Next. So the relaxation response will decrease heart rate. Most importantly, it is responsible for your digestion. So when there's a digestive issue, it's typically because you're stressed. Because now you're borrowing resources from the stuff that's supposed to take care of your internal function. Next. Immune function. Did you all know that cancer is an immune problem? That we have spontaneous, about 1 in a billion or a few billion cell divisions, you have a mutation. But your body has a system to clean that out. There's something called natural killer T cell, and they will find that faulty cell and clean it out. But if your immune system is asleep because you're off fighting a bear, then that cancer is going to have a free rein. All right? Another point on immune system. Colds and flus and infections, they're caused by something called opportunistic organisms. What does that mean? That means that they're always around, but they'll get a foothold when your defenses are down. They take the opportunity when you're busy being stressed, then your immune system shuts down. When does everybody in school get a cold? Around finals. Right? Because you eat junk, you don't sleep, and you're worried. Your immune system's down, you get an infection. And 90% of the room is coughing and sneezing. Reproductive function, healing, and repair. All of those go down. So the really important stuff that make you healthy, the stuff that really is what health is shut down by stress. And this is how we're wired. This is hardwired. It's a survival mechanism. And the problem is, this has been set up hundreds of millions of years ago whenever we had a serious threat, something like a bear come around. And fortunately, today we don't have many bears, but we have other stresses. We have deadlines and jobs and kids and driving schedules and news and bad news and unemployment and insurance issues and you name it. And all these little stresses, do they ever go away? The grizzly bear, if you survive the grizzly bear, he'll go away and then you can go home to your cave and you can relax. But these modern stresses, they're always with us. And they're always spinning around in the back of our head. So that's why this becomes so important. So what is it now that will balance out the system? Because the way it looks here, we're sort of screwed, right? We have stress and it starts all these processes, and what are we supposed to do about it? Go ahead. So here's the magic. The cortex is wired to inhibit the stress. The cortex inhibits several different things, but one of the most important things that it turns off is your stress response. So the better your cortex is working, the more blood flow, the more activity we have in the cortex, in the prefrontal cortex, the better it's able to inhibit and dampen and balance that stress response. Okay? Now the problem here is, whenever we shift resources away from the internal function over to external to defend against the outside, we're also shifting resources away from the cortex to the brainstem. Because we don't need the cortex when there's a bear chasing. We just need reflex action and instinct. And you all know this because how many times have you been really, really frustrated and it's really hard to think? The more frustrated, the angrier you get, the more stressed or irritated you become, the less blood is available in your cortex, and it all shifts down to your brainstem, and you just want to go punch something. And it makes sense, because that's survival. That's how we're wired. So how then do we get the blood back in the cortex? Because if we have chronic stress, where we're chronically firing that sympathetic more, we're chronically depriving the cortex of blood, so we're always losing a little bit of brain function. And this, by the way, is essentially the mechanism for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and most degenerative diseases, because in Parkinson's they have a 10-15% loss of weight of their brain tissue because they're not getting the stimulation and the activity of the cortex. So now we introduce a principle called use it or lose it. Every cell in your body, you have about 100 trillion cells, give or take. They exist for a reason. You have muscle cells to perform work, you have brain cells to signal function, you have bone cells to support against gravity. And any time that you don't put a demand on those cells, there's no reason for the body to keep them around. So if you go to the gym and you work out that muscle and that muscle gets bigger and stronger, then that's because you challenge that cell so that it needs to become stronger and do something more for next time. The brain works the same way. Your body will not keep around brain cells that you don't use. And the cells that you use more, they will get stronger. The brain cells you use less will get weaker. And we're not talking metaphorically, we're talking literally, physically. They will shrink, just like the muscle. And they need two things. They need fuel and activation. So what is it that activates a brain cell? What is it that the brain does? We know that it regulates all the function of every cell, but what is it that it does? In a nutshell, the brain exists to process electrical signals. That's the main function that it has. So the more electrical signals that we can send to the cortex, the healthier and stronger and better functioning and better regulating that cortex will be. Now the question is, how do you send electrical signals to the brain? So if I go over here and I touch him on the knee and he notices, I sent the signal to some brain cells. If his brain didn't fire off, he would never know about that. But what we have to understand is that signal not only sends information to the brain, it changes the brain. Use it or lose it. So touching him on the knee is not going to change his life. Sorry. But if we can find specific places on the body that have a huge amount of electrical input to the brain, and we are specific enough, and we use the right amount of stimulation, we can literally actually change that brain. And it's the only thing you can change, is really how the brain processes things. Go ahead. Now, where do most of those electrical signals come from? What is it the brain does? So if I give you a choice, it's a multiple choice question. Where do the majority of electrical signals come from that keep the brain alive? Is it from thinking? Is it from seeing? From hearing? From touch? Or from movement? Let's see a show of hands for thinking, seeing,
Yes.
hearing, touch, or movement. See some hesitation here. Not a lot of hands. The answer is movement. The answer is movement. Movement, which includes body position, knowing where your body parts are and knowing where you are in relation to gravity and your environment, occupies about 80% of everything the brain does. The single largest influence on your nervous system is gravity. And for you to function in a field of gravity and in an environment and know where your body parts are is the single most important thing for your survival. So what this means is movement is the single biggest stimulant, nutrition for your brain. And it comes from two places. So if I can close my eyes and do this on a good day, that means the brain has to get some sort of information to know where the finger is relative to the nose. This is called proprioception, knowing where things are. And this information is conveyed to the brain via muscles and joints. Muscles and joints. So if we really want to send a lot of information to the brain and keep the brain strong and change it, we need to find where are the largest number of muscles and joints and receptors in the body. And the answer is in the spine. Go ahead. And chiropractors didn't know this 100 years ago when they started adjusting the spine, but it just happened that we lucked out on the place with the biggest buttons. That the spine is the place where you can have the largest influence on the nervous system. It's not the only place we work, but it's the main one. So here's something interesting to understand now we put this together. If you look at these arrows, if you have normal movement in a motion segment, then there'll be an equal signal on the left and right side of the spine. Go ahead. But if we have a trauma, if we have a stress, if we have something that diminishes that movement on one side, then there will be less, go ahead, there will be less signaling and the brain will have less stimulation and it will start shrinking. Go ahead. Less signal, less size. Less signal, less size. What's the solution? How do we fix this? We go in. Oh, Too far. Go back. Yeah, that's fine. So we go in and we alter the movement. We alter the feedback of that part of the body. We restore the signaling, and when we restore the signaling, we restore the regulation and the size and the function of your brain halves. Okay? Next. So this is why chiropractic actually works. This is a scan of your brain before an adjustment, and the squiggles, the size of the squiggles that you see is before and after. So you can see that an adjustment really is nothing about whether the spine is aligned or not. It has nothing to do with bones. It's about what happens in the brain when you put pressure on some receptors in the body. Go ahead. So, back one. So here's a key point. When the brain works better, everything works better. Pain relief is just a bonus. It's not about pain relief. It's not about the spine. It's about making the brain work better. And when the brain works better, everything works better. Next. So what fits your busy schedule better? Exercising an hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? It's all about priorities. And most of us, unfortunately, we don't get serious about something until we have a real threatening, scary diagnosis. But the time to really do prevention is before anything has ever happened, which means today and for the rest of your life. Next. We'll go ahead and skip this one. So there's really three causes of disease. One is distorted input feedback. Two, inappropriate processing. That means inappropriate stress responses. And three, lack of proper building blocks. That means nutrition. So yes, if we don't have vitamin D, if we don't have the proper proteins, if we don't have the essential fatty acids, your body can't send the proper messages, and it can't build the proper body components. So yes, nutrition is important, but without the proper feedback and the proper processing, the body is not going to work. Go ahead. So what's required for health? If I ask you, if I have a plant, and it's not a plastic one, but a real plant, and it starts wilting, what's the first thing you're going to do? Water. What? And if you give it water and it's not working so well, what's the next thing?
Sunlight.
Sunlight. You take it out of the closet. Third, if it's still not looking so healthy, you start looking at the soil, fertilizer. Is it getting nutrition? So if you have 1,000 plants and you try to raise them with 2 out of 3 required components, you give them water and sunlight but no soil, or you give them water and soil but no sunlight. After a year or so, how many of those 1,000 plants are going to be healthy? None. Because if something's required, you can't do without it. And what do humans need? We need nutrients, we need movement, and we need purpose. So nutrients is kind of obvious. We have to have things that make the body work. We need to avoid toxins and so forth. Movement, that's why everybody's talking about exercise. Why does exercise work for diabetes? Why does it work for colon cancer? Why does it work for hypertension? Because it stimulates the brain and makes the brain work better. It's not the only thing it works for. It works for chronic pain, it works for depression, it works for amazing things. What chiropractors do a little different is we go in and we help where exercise isn't enough. When the feedback patterns are off, we can help normalize that. Solutions: eat better, move better, feel better. Those are not optional. You can get by with 2 out of 3 for decades. The body is amazing. It will adapt, it will compensate, it will do incredible things, but not forever. You can get by for 20, 30, 40 years, but if you don't get all 3 in the long run, you cannot have optimal health and optimal function, because these are the things your body requires to function. Next. And that's all I have. So this was about a week's worth in 30 minutes, so hope some of it made a little bit of sense. This is what we do in our clinic. We do stress response testing. We do a test with an electroencephalogram, which means we measure brain function. We do a test to see how is your sympathetic and parasympathetic balanced. And if there's issues, then we can show you things that you can change. We show you how chiropractic works and things that you can do, which include nutrition and exercise and biofeedback, and highly encourage yoga and tai chi and stretching and all those things because they're wonderful. Yeah, we'll skip this. So we're opening a new clinic, and we're so excited about talking to all of you that we are here today instead of working on things that need to be done in the clinic. But we will nonetheless open tomorrow, and we would be excited to have any of you talk to us and ask questions. There are cards on every table, I believe. And what we'd like to offer is if anybody wants a free 15-minute consultation, just give us a call and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ekberg. That was really very interesting, and I think it's something to look at. We would like to take some questions now. Any questions for any of the speakers? I think before we field the questions and answers, we're going to give the raffle tickets to everybody, and we will have that, and then we'll take the questions.